Alright, so today we will be making that viral knife throwing app that's on the App Store. Here we are in Unity. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to go get some assets that we're going to use to make this. It's pretty easy, so I'm going to go, you can make your own in Photoshop if you know how, or you can go to Google, and I'm going to be using an apple and a knife. To find your assets, you just type in either vector or sprite and it'll come up with everything that you need. You go to tools, and if you're worried about usage rights, if this is something you ever want to publish, then you can do labeled for reuse, and you can do color. You want to make sure that it has a transparent background, and to make sure that it has a transparent background, you'll see a checkered background. That'll show that it's usable for the game. This is the asset that I went ahead and used for the apple. I'll go ahead and I already have mine downloaded, so I'm going to go ahead and grab these, and you can just drag them straight into the project view. And I also went ahead and got a farm background that I'll be using. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is bring these into the scene and start just setting them up so that it looks kind of how we're going to want to have it. So, and you can drag these straight in. I'm going to all of your tools are up here if you want to manipulate the different objects. This is the move tool. You can also use Q, W, E, and R to swap between those. I'm going to take this knife and I'm going to rotate it so it's facing straight up. I'm going to take this apple and I'm going to grab both of them. I use shift to select both of them. I'm going to scale those down. I want the apple to be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to select just the knife and continue to scale that down until it's about that big. And what we'll be doing is you're going to be shooting these knives up into the apple, and they're going to stick in, and you have to hit the spaces between your other knives. So let's go ahead and make a couple of scripts. We're going to make a C# script knife, a C# script called apple. And you wouldn't normally just name scripts the name of your objects in a bigger project. This is a small project since it's fine, because each object only has a little bit of functionality. Normally you would name your script specific to whatever action it's performing. And then we're also going to make a spawner script that's going to be, well, I'll call it actually launcher. This is going to be what's launching our knives. And then I'll start it out with a knife script, so double click on that to open it. All right, once you are in your IDE, what we're going to do is we're going to have a serialized field, meaning it's going to show up in the inspector. Another way to serialize objects is by making it public, and that'll actually automatically serialize it. But we're going to make a serialized private vector3 speed. That's going to be the speed at which our knife is moving. We're also going to have a bool hit, and this is going to tell us whenever the knife is actually hit the apple, because we're going to say if hit, then return, and then we'll just say transform dot translate speed times time dot delta time. We're multiplying our speed by the change in time to make it frame independent. And one thing that you might also do is do a fixed update instead of update. It's another built-in function that runs just like update, except it'll be running off of your time scale instead of running every frame. Depending on where you have your time scale set, it might run multiple times per frame, or it might run less than one time per frame. I'm gonna come back into Unity. So normally you want to use fixed update if you're doing anything with that's strictly just moving an object. So I'm going to take my knife script and I'm going to put it on my knife object, and I'm going to set the Y speed to 10, and hopefully we should see our knife launching. And it's launching off in the wrong direction. That's because with transform.translate we rotated our object, and now if you hit W and you look at your local space, and you can swap between local and global. Local is going to be the relative one. So this is the way that it's pointing right now because we rotated it earlier. What we need to do is move it relative to world space. So space dot world, and now it'll be moving along this arrow instead. just like that. And right now I have it on set to maximize on play, and your game window is probably right here. I like to put mine off to the side so I can see what's happening in my game and in my scene. I'm going to go ahead and disable maximize on play so that whenever I play it, it'll just play in my game window right here, and I can see what's going on. And what we'll do is we'll also go ahead and add a box collider to our knife and get some collision going with the apple. Box collider, or you know what, actually, to make this a lot easier, we're going to use a polygon collider. And make sure and check the box that says is trigger. We're also going to give it a rigid body 2D. If you don't have it set to trigger, then Unity's physics is going to have it behave differently. And then we are going to set the rigid body from dynamic to kinematic, meaning we are going to be controlling all of the physics on it. Then on our apple, we are going to add a rigid body 2D. This one is going to be static, meaning it's not going to be moving at all. And then we are going to give it the apple script, and we're also going to give it a circle collider. And I'm going to go ahead and actually scale the radius of my circle collider in a little bit so that the knife will stick into the apple. And also on the sprite, I'm going to set the order in layer to 1 so that our knives go behind the apple, because the order in layer is going to be the order that these are being rendered. We want our apple rendered over the knives. So now if you hit play, you'll see that it's going to go behind. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use the void Ontriggerenter 2D. Make sure that you're using Ontriggerenter 2D. There's a lot of functions that look like this one. If other, we're going to check if we hit the apple. If other dot get component apple, then so this is going to return true or false whether or not it hits the apple. If the other object does have the component apple, then we're going to set hit to true, and then it should stop moving. This actually won't oh, it did collide. One thing that we do want to do though is go ahead and set our apple to a trigger as well, so that we won't have anything else colliding with it, so it doesn't really matter too much, but it's good to stay consistent and use triggers instead of colliders if that's what we're going with. So now I'm going to go ahead and go into the apple script and get this to start spinning. So I'll have a public, it's going to be a serialized field, private vector 3 rotation speed. We're going to say transform dot rotate, lowercase transform. You need to make sure you're accessing the property, not the class. Transform dot rotate, transform dot rotate rotation speed times, and actually for this we don't need to multiply it by delta time because it'll be going fairly slowly anyways. I would put it in fixed update to make it frame independent. And right now we never actually set the rotate speed, so it won't rotate. We need to, I'll set that maybe 3, sounds good, on the Z. The Z axis is the forward to back axis, so that's the one that we're gonna wanna be rotating it on. 3 is a little bit fast, so I'm gonna set it to 2. And one thing that I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna modify this a little bit. I'm gonna have this vector, I'm gonna refactor it, click on it and double click Control R to refactor. I'm gonna refactor it to being called rotation, and you can get rid of the formerly serialized, we can just reserialize it. And I'm also gonna have and actually this doesn't even need to be serialized anymore. We're gonna have a serialized field, private float rotation speed, and on start, void start, we're gonna say rotation equals new vector 3 0 0, and then rotation speed, and that way. And instead of serializing this, what we're going to do is we're going to give it a range from -10 to 10, and you'll see what this does. Will make our lives a little bit better. I don't know if this has to be public or not for it to actually serialize for us. I think range might serialize it, and it doesn't. So yeah, we have to make this public. We could also just add the serialized field attribute again, but I don't want to clutter up too much. So now you'll see we have this slider here, and we can just change the rotation speed. So in the actual game, the apple's rotation speed changes. So if we want to rotate it faster or slower, and right now this actually isn't doing anything because we have it set to only happen at the start, but this is just so that we can quickly modify the value to play with different speeds of the apple if you wanted to up the difficulty for different levels. And then what we're going to do is knife Ontriggerenter. We're actually going to right now the knife isn't rotating with the apple, which we want to change. We're going to set the apple as the knife's parent, meaning it'll move with the apple whenever the apple moves. So transform dot parent equals other dot transform, and make sure that you're putting this in this if statement so that we know that other is the apple. So now whenever it hits, it should start rotating with the apple just like that. Make sure and hit Control S every now and then to save your scene. And now we're going to go ahead and code our spawner, or our launcher here. We're going to have a serialized field private game object called knife prefab. I'll walk you through what a prefab is here in a second. Knife prefab, and we'll say we'll need a reference to that knife. So we'll have a knife, my knife. So right now we're creating an object of our class knife. We made a class knife, and right now we are declaring that, and we'll be instantiating it here in a second. Public static launcher, and this is the launcher. We're giving it a static, public static reference to itself, and we're going to call this instance. This is going to be so that other game objects can find the launcher and talk to it. And on awake, so this is another built-in function. Awake happens before start, and so we're going to instantiate the instance so that other objects can find this, and that's why we're doing it in awake, so it happens at the very start of the scene. We're going to say if instance, and this is what's known as a singleton design pattern. Singleton. If instance does not equal null. So if it's not null, then there already is one. We need to destroy it. Destroy instance dot game object, because there only needs to be one of them. And then we're going to say instance equals this. There will only ever be one launcher. If there's multiple launchers, then we made a mistake. So destroy the other launcher. This is the only launcher. And then we'll say void. We're going to do a public function. Public void spawn. So this is how we're going to spawn our new knife. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the instantiate function, which belongs to the class monoBehavior, which we're extending, and that's going to take in the game object prefab, knife prefab, and I'll explain this whenever we get back to the editor. All this really means is we're going to be making another knife. Instantiate knife prefab. We are going to, and here are all of the, whenever you wait a second, you'll see all of these different overloads. We're going to be using this one. We're going to give it the vector position and the rotation. We're going to say transform.position. So we're going to instantiate it at the position of the spawner. Transform.position is talking about the spawner's position because this is on the spawner, the launcher. And we're also going to set it to our position or our rotation, transform.rotation, so that all of them can be consistent with the rotation. And one thing that we'll also do is this will actually return. So if you click right here, you'll see that it returns a game object. So we are going to cache that reference as our knife. So my knife equals instantiate, and then so this is going to return the game object, but our knife is of type knife, so we have to get the component off of the game object, knife. So we know that our knife has our knife game object has a knife component on it. So we know whenever we're instantiating a new one, it'll always have this component, so we can instantiate it, get that component, and save the reference to the component as my knife. All right, and the next step is going to be telling when our knife is actually supposed to spawn, and that also our knife is going to have a public void launch. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to replace fixed update with what's called an IEnumerator. If you've ever done parallel programming, an IEnumerator in C# is similar to a thread. But it's not multi-threaded. It's actually just concurrency, meaning it's all running on the same thread still. But we're going to use this IEnumerator to pretend like it's an update function. We're going to be using this IEnumerator to make our own update function. It's going to be IEnumerator launch. And we're going to have a loop. It's going to be while, so we can get rid of if hit. We're going to say while not hit. While it hasn't hit, we're going to be going forward. And IEnumerators need a return statement called a yield return. If you don't have a yield return statement, this is going to be an infinite loop and it's going to crash your program. And yield return null is going to say wait until the end of the frame. And then that way, whenever we go into our launcher, we can have a start function, void start, spawn. So we're going to spawn it once at the beginning. And then we're also going to have an update in here, void update. We're going to check for input if input.get key, and you can do whatever key you want. Make sure it's get key down, so it only happens once. Key code dot space. That's the button I think that makes the most sense. If you want to make this an app, you would do keycode dot mouse 0. That's left click on PC and it's touch on a touch screen. We'll say my knife. So if we get space and we're going to say my knife, and we know that my knife exists because we instantiated it and we got the reference. So now, and that's why we did it like that. So now we can say my knife dot launch, and this actually won't work just like this because we didn't use a function, we used a coroutine. What you have to do is, and I don't know if we actually made it public. No, we didn't. Right now it's private, so we can't access it at all. You have to make it a public IEnumerator, and then whenever you come back over here, what just happened? Whenever you come back over here, you have to say start coroutine my knife dot launch, and then that'll start that loop for us, and it'll start going until it hits something. And then we can spawn another. One issue that will happen with this though is our knives are going to be hitting each other because as soon as you shoot one, it's going to be spawning another one right away. What we want to do is actually use the invoke method, which belongs to monobehavior, and that'll take in a string of the method name, and then how much time you want to wait, and 0.2 floating point number is a good value, so it'll actually spawn shortly after you already shot. So all of this should be working fine. Let's see, Unity. So one thing that we're going to need is, first off, to make our launcher. So create an empty game object. You can call it launcher. Right click. So you'll notice sometimes whenever you create an empty game object, the position is going to be garbage. You need to right click the transform and click reset to reset it to 0. And we're going to want this where our knife is. So you can actually grab that and bring it on down. That looks about right. And a good way to actually do this, because we also want the rotation of the knife, you're going to right click on the knife's transform, click copy component, and go over to the launcher and right click and say paste component values, and it will actually move exactly. And you can see now it's actually rotated like the knife is. So it'll be straight whenever we spawn our knives. And we're going to add on our launcher script, and you'll see it wants our knife prefab here. And right now there's none. So if we ran it and we tried to spawn it, we'd get a null reference exception because we have this object, but the reference is null. What we have to do is prefab the object, meaning save it as a file so that we can create as many copies of that object as we want to. To create a prefab, grab whatever object you want to prefab. We're going to be prefabbing our knife and just drag it into the project. It's that easy. And now if you wanted 1,000 knives, you can make 1,000 knives and all of them will do the same thing. Except they're not launching right now because we haven't told them to, and we're still getting no references. So we need to fix that first. The launcher needs a reference to the prefab, not the game object. Make sure that you're dragging it in from the project view. And then let's see if we're missing anything else. Apple knife. I think that should actually do it. Yep. So we're spawning knives, and yeah, so this looks like it's working right, except for some reason our knife is respawning immediately. There should be a delay there. The issue is just that we never deleted the original knife that we already had in the scene. Now that we have a launcher, we don't need this knife anymore, so we can just get rid of it altogether. If we want to see where our launcher is, we can use, because right now it's just invisible. You have no way of telling where it is if you're just looking in the scene. If you want to see an invisible object, then you can do you can use the mono behavior on draw gizmos function, and you can say draw gizmos.draw sphere, and we can say vector transform.position radius of 1, and there we go. So that should in our yeah, so now you can see a little sphere where our launcher is in the scene only, and it won't show up in our game. So and instead of using draw sphere, let's do draw wire sphere. I think it looks a little bit cleaner. And for this one, okay, so draw wire sphere point 0.5f, and then that way we can actually, don't forget your semicolon, we'll see what exactly where our spawner is in the scene. It's right here. And now whenever we hit play, you should be able to start shooting at your knives. Okay, so that's everything for this episode. For the next episode, we will actually be gamifying it, making sure that you have your win and your lose condition, and we'll even animate the apple so that it'll explode. We'll show you how to cut up any sprite and make it explode once you've actually done it, and we'll have it so that if your knife hits another knife, then it'll lose, and we can even throw in some curveballs like modifying the apple speed and all of that. So if you enjoyed this, then come in and watch the next episode.